Hi, Gio. I'm Sarah from the upcoming. So lovely to chat to you.
You too.
Where am I speaking to you from? Are
I'm
you?
in Milan.
Oh, lovely. Hopefully the weather's a bit better than it has been in
Well,
England.
it's hot, yeah. I mean, it's super hot, but that's Italian summer.
So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Maybe you could just kick off with a brief introduction to which, what can people expect if they're going to watch this documentary? It's not your average kind of music documentary. It's got, it's quite niche, and it's got a very specific spirit behind it. So maybe you could just give a brief introduction.
Sure. So, Witch is a documentary about the band called Witch, which was the biggest band in Zambia, a rock and roll band in Zambia from the 1970s. The band was called Witch, which was an acronym for We Intend to Cause Havoc, which to come up with that in the 70s in Zambia, I think is pretty cool already. But yes, it's the story of the band's lead singer, whose name is Jaggery, and he is Jaggery because he was the Zambian Mick Jagger. And the story follows, well, with the film, like I tried to do a couple of things, which is mainly to give the viewer a sort of background on Zambia, on the historical situation in the 60s and the 70s that led to this music being created and why this music was created, the influences it had, and so on. And then Jaggery's life story up until we get to the present day, where we becomes more observational as a documentary, where we see a new formation of this band reforming and playing concerts in Zambia and in Europe. I guess that kind of is.
And how did you first come across this band? And what was it that motivated you to kind of go on this journey? And I suppose when you set out to make a documentary of this nature, it's not like you're just kind of doing a retrospective. It's like kind of a living documentary. The things change, as you're making it. So what were you expecting? And was it anything like you could have predicted the outcome?
To answer that quickly, no, it wasn't anything like I predicted. And to come back to your first question, I heard Witch because a good friend of mine sent me a song on Facebook back in the day, quite simply. I heard it and I was knocked out because it just really was something that really blew me away. It sounded so familiar, yet something I had never heard before. A lot of elements of it I really enjoyed. And then I kind of kept that in the back of my mind for a couple of years up until a couple of years later, some friends of mine were doing this African expedition. They needed an extra driver and somebody to take some photographs. When I found out that we were passing through Zambia, I was like, well, which Zambia, gotta somehow find out more, And initially I kind of maybe wanted to shoot. I had this blog where I did these live sessions of bands that came through Milan. And I was like, well, maybe I can shoot a session with them. And I was like, well, maybe since I'm there, I can ask a couple of questions. And then it kind of snowballed and it kept snowballing into something that I dreamt it would become like this, but I never thought it would become something like this, And just as things, because it took, I mean, from the first time I had Jagger in front of me to when we presented the film, it took about 5 years. So in that time, my mind was constantly working on it, and certain things were just happening quite organically, I must say. But then just, yeah, kept snowballing, and then suddenly it all happened, I guess.
And when you'd obviously kind of collected, all that footage, all those things happened, all the things that unfolded, and then you kind of had to stitch this together into a narrative. You've also got the archival footage and the other bits of animation. So how did you go about that process of putting it together? And, what was it like going back, seeing some of that archival footage, some of it absolutely incredible, even the bits, the unseen bits of James Brown and things like that. So what was that process like?
Well, being in the archive there was, I don't know if I really felt like an Indiana Jones or an archaeologist or something, because it was this room that, yeah, I hadn't been open in 17 years because they lost the key and they never bothered to, like, I mean, who cares about this stuff anyways? And so, like, we got a locksmith to come in, open it, and then it had been all on shelves, but those shelves had broken, so it would just on the floor, and there was no catalog, so we just had to go and like dust off these reels and see what we would find, and then project it and then film that projection. It was like kind of a crazy thing, but we did it, and we were always hoping to find which we never found. We did find things that helped us tell the story and see how Zambia was back in the day and so on. But that was a fun part. But then once we finally finished shooting and we started editing, that took about a year because we had 200 hours of footage to put together in an hour and a half. So I had to look at all of the footage once again with the editor, highlight the things that, we liked and we didn't. There were some things that I remembered happening, but then they weren't on film, and vice versa, and so on. And then we then did a cut, several cuts with a structure, and then I was like, yes, but no. So I kind of took every single scene, put it on a card, a little card, mixed them all around, and then recut it, and then gave it a different flow, because before it was more of a chronological narrative, and now, as you know, it just goes back and forth, and like keeps a mind like ours nowadays that's very easily distracted, more concentrated, I guess, in some ways.
And one of the big things I think comes out of the film is perhaps, are there some stereotypes where we don't readily associate Africa with rock music or with that period in time, seeing, like back in the 70s and the fashion and everything. And, the fact that he was kind of the African, Mick Jagger or like the Beatles or whatever, and realizing there was actually a much more symbiotic relationship between kind of Western music in that time that lingers on to this day. Rolling Stones being influenced by African rhythms, and then African artists being influenced by rock. So, how did that kind of become clear to you throughout the film? And do you think that's one of the big things people take away?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping it is, because it's kind of like, as I say in the film, something quite interesting, which when they started off with Jaggery being called Jaggery, they were obsessed with the Rolling Stones. And the Rolling Stones were obsessed with the Chicago blues musicians. And the blues musicians came from the slave plantation, the cotton plantations of the southern United States. And their ancestors were brought over by slave ships from Africa, right? So it's kind of like this full circle that all this, maybe this one rhythm came all the way around and came back to where it was born. And I just got goosebumps saying that. But it's, it's something that when I kind of like, it clicked, I was like, wow, actually, it's there, and it's just like an interpretation of the same thing, and I find that really fascinating, because it just makes everything so connected and beautiful. It's something that, like initially you don't really think about, but once you think about it a bit more, you're like, oh yeah, there it is, it's all there, all one. And although it's maybe a bit watered down in its, circle that it takes, then again, like the basics are there. So then you can expand from it, and it becomes something else.
And one of the other things I felt like watching, do you feel like, reliving some of those moments of, back in the 70s and live performance and seeing people dancing, seeing crowds, it strikes even more of a chord knowing that, we've rarely been able to see any kind of live music for well over a year now. So, what was it like going back and looking at that perhaps over the last year, or now putting it out at this moment in time and realizing what we've missed, and hopefully we can get back?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we will get back to it soon. But yeah, I mean, when I was looking at that stuff with those photos, everything, I just really wanted to be there more than anything else, And it's just something that, because there's not that many photographs. There's not that much video footage of like a witch concert, and like reading like the reviews on the paper about like police having to keep fans at bay because they would like knock the doors down for the venue because they wanted to come in and stuff like that, or Jaggery jumping from a second story balcony into the crowds, crazy stuff, and there is no evidence. The only thing is just people's, it's an oral history, and that adds so much more legendary status to it, you know. And I just
Mm.
like, "Oh, damn, I wish, you know, I wish we could be there." But I have to say that Jaggery's still the same when we play live shows. He still does these crazy things. Like, like he's has he crowd surfed? Well, I think he's done a stage dive once, but like I mean, he's turning 70 this year. You know, like it's not like that's stopping him.
Mm.
So I mean, we're hoping to be touring again next year. So yeah, hopefully it will happen again very soon.
And how does it feel to have kind of made something happen in that way, with the band coming back together and doing the tour? Because I guess sometimes making documentaries is more an observational process
Mhm.
rather than kind of creating history yourself. So,
Mhm.
what kind of is that position like, and what do you hope to kind of happen in future for them?
Well, I mean, the position, it could be weird because you could say like, oh, you know, it's like tampering with the story, you know. But then again, it's like I have these connections, I have this opportunity. Like, why not? You know, like
Yeah.
I mean, I if I didn't say it in the film, it'd be weird. But I'm saying it like, oh, I knew this guy, and I thought like, oh, let's put these things together. So yeah, I mean, it feels that, you know, I became part of the story myself in some ways, you know, which then, you know, I mean, now we're all a family, really, you know, me, the band, Jaggery, and everybody, you know, we speak to each other quite often. We all have big plans. And, you know, you know, what we always say is like, let's see how far we can take this, you know, like there is no limit, you know, like let's see where we can get to next.
Yeah.
And every time, you know, I think back where we are now and where we started, I'm like, I would never have expected it to be. I mean, I would have hoped, but never thought that we would get to where we are.
Mm. And the other thing that comes out in the film is obviously, there is this political backdrop. We are also getting an insight into, what's happened in Africa, particularly in Zambia. So what was it like having to bring that in? And, some of those elements quite like troubling, and it makes you realize we don't necessarily know the ins and outs of what's happened, in all these different African countries.
For
There's a
sure.
certain ignorance perhaps from the West.
I mean, for sure. I mean, that ignorance started with me. Like when I first heard Witch, I had no idea where Zambia was. You know, like I couldn't place it on a map. I had very little knowledge about Africa, African history, politics, and culture. Clearly, as I started working on this, I had to do my research, and it's kind of funny that like when I go to Zambia, I managed to have like political conversation with taxi drivers about like the different politicians, you know. But it's something that, you know, if I had to tell the story, I mean, not had to, but I wanted to tell the story, and I wanted to tell it right, and I wanted to understand where people were coming from, you know, why certain things were happening in the country that led to ultimately this music being created or not being created. So I had to do my background into finding out, and clearly I wanted to transmit that to the viewer as well, because then it could, you know, you understand more. You know, you see why there was an economic boom after independence, that everything great went well, and then as soon as copper prices dropped, because that's the main export of Zambia, things took a turn for the worse, and then just trickled down to like way worse, and then hopefully now it's back on the rise.
Mhm. And at its heart, the film really seems to be, very celebratory and kind of have this sort of retro spirit to it, and all the psychedelic kind of look to it and everything. So, what do you hope that people will take away overall?
I mean, the story and the music. That's what I want people to know. It's like once they've seen it, I would love for them to go out and buy a Witch record, or like put it on their Spotify playlist. I guess that's what we gotta say nowadays. But you know, like something like that. That's what I'd hope the most, you know, because like what I hope the most, as I say in the film at the beginning, that my reason for doing the film is getting this music the recognition it deserved. You know, I'm hoping that through this film and through what we're doing around the film, we're bringing it to as many ears as possible. And it's music that could have been forgotten, but hopefully will be remembered and yeah, and appreciated by as many people as possible.
And very quickly, what's next then in terms of, are you going to do another documentary? Are you going to, focus on your efforts just on this stuff? So
No, well, I mean, I'm going to do another film, but not a documentary, because I'd repeat myself and, you know, go to some other place in the world, find a musician that needs to have this recognition, and I'm already doing that with Witch and Jaggery, and it would just feel like having a second family, and one is
Mm.
enough, I guess. So no, but I'm in the process of writing a new script of a fiction film. It's still very much in the early stages, but hopefully I hope to have finished it by the next couple of months, and then start the process of finding funding and so on. But it's
Mhm.
still definitely to do with got to do with music, but it's more of a surreal journey that I still have to figure out, but it will be there.
All right, fantastic. Well, I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much for chatting to us.
Thank
It was
you.
really lovely to chat to you, and best of luck with the release and everything happening with the band after this. So
Thank you so much. Thank
lovely
you
to
so
chat to you. See you. Thanks a lot.
much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.